What we mean when we talk about cities has a great deal to do with the mental images we have of a city or that we form in engaging with it. What do we see when we look at a city, and how do we see it? After all, the image we have of a city, and indeed our idea of what a city is, depends crucially on how we perceived it. It makes a big difference whether I see a city as a panorama, move through it, or look down on it from a tall building or an airplane. It also makes a big difference whether I've seen a map of a city before visiting it. That's because maps foreground ideas and notions of order that may not be readily apparent when I move through an urban ensemble. The way a city appears is different depending on the means of transportation I use, a train, a car, or a bicycle, and different yet again when I walk in it or look at it from a window of a building. With many cities, we have seen recent as well as older photographs or films before we go there, and the perspectives they record also inform our images of a city before we've even been there. Why am I telling you this? After all, you're supposed to draft a city, you're not writing an essay about how you perceived it. Still, I think it's important to be aware of how perception works and how impressions are created, and to draw on this knowledge in the design process. Cities are not just functional units. They are heterogeneous spaces of experience, physical as well as psychological. We shape cities, most fundamentally because we build them, but cities also shape us in turn through their ways of guiding our movements and perceptions. There is a wonderful essay by the French philosopher Michel de Certeau. In his book, The Practice of Everyday Life, he describes the view of New York as seen from above, from the top floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. The city is limned in metaphors of a landscape, as an urban island in the sea that itself moves in waves. Let me quote a short passage from this essay, whose verbal images render very vividly how gazes and their descriptions solidify a city in its specific contours and affect our imagination of the urban fabric. Quote, "The urban island, a sea in the middle of the sea, lifts up the skyscrapers over Wall Street, sinks down at Greenwich, then rises again to the crest of Midtown, quietly passes over Central Park, and finally undulates off into the distance beyond Harlem. A wave of verticals, its agitation is momentarily arrested by vision. The gigantic mass is immobilized before the eyes. It is transformed into a textuology in which extremes coincide. Extremes of ambition and degradation, brutal oppositions of races and styles, contrasts between yesterday's building, already transformed into trash cans, and today's urban eruptions that block out its space." End of quote. This short and dense passage interweaves different aspects. The city is envisioned as a landscape, and even more as the picture of a landscape in motion, which is of course exactly what a built city is not. De Certeau's portrayal inscribes upon the urban image the particular quality that defines the city. It is an architectural stage for movement. His description represents this movement as a form, as rising and falling, in the alternation between eras crowded with high rises and others where the buildings are lower, between built-up areas and open spaces, an undulating mass of vertical lines. Folded into this form is the movement of history, not just of architectural styles, but also of the ambitions and ideas associated with architecture. All these aspects, however, become legible only when the movement de Certeau conjures up is arrested, in the frozen moment of a gaze. Only when we mask out the movement that brings a city to life can we read the signs and structures that coalesce in the fabric down there. We see the fantasies and ideas of the planners, especially in the axes, the squares and hotspots of densification. But we also see the unplanned wild growth and idiosyncratic interventions. In the gaze from above, the master plan and the reality of a growing and changing city intersect. The view from above is a distance and it would seem commanding gaze. It's not for no reason that it has been compared to the eye of God. Yet the same gaze from above also reveals wild growth, demonstrating that the power of the planners and their efforts to exercise total control over the city are no match for the idiosyncratic dynamism of urban development. And this is for the benefit of the city's residents.